Hello, Giuseppe.
Hello.
I'm really happy to have you here for our very first interview. Thanks a lot that you're taking the time. I have a lot of questions for you, and just to structure it a bit,
Mhm,
first, I'd like to know something about your personal background and your motivation, then about digital brain twins
mhm,
in general, so your
mhm,
work, your topic, and then the
mhm,
project you work on, SimTwin.
mhm, mhm,
Then I will ask some questions about ethical issues.
mhm,
And last but not least, I have some questions about the future prospects and feasibility of digital brain twins.
mhm, mhm.
Okay. Um, First of all, could you please introduce yourself briefly? Who are you and what are you currently working on?
Sure. My name is Giuseppe Comerci, and I'm a PhD student at the Department of Social Ethics of the University of Bonn. And well, my background, I'm basically by training, I'm a philosopher. So I obtained my both my bachelor and my master degrees in philosophy in Milan, Italy. I also spent few months, roughly 3 months, at the Department of Medicine at the University of Zurich, in particular at the Center of Biomedical Ethics, and where I worked on my master dissertations. And then, yeah, I started to look for a PhD position, and I ended up here in Bonn. And right now, I'm working under the supervision of Professor Matthias Braun.
Mhm. Cool. And maybe first a personal question.
Mhm.
How did you become interested in neuroethics?
Uh, so basically, I always interested during my bachelor in, let's say, theoretical philosophy, and generally speaking, my background, at least from the bachelor, is mainly about continental philosophy, which is quite very different field. But since the period I've started to work on my bachelor dissertation, I was interested in applied philosophy and how to apply philosophy to some problem and issues of nowadays. I ended up writing a thesis about continental philosophy and very, very theoretical and crazy stuff about metaphysics and ontology. But still, I kept to have this feeling that it would have been great to just try to apply philosophy to things like artificial intelligence and robotics, for example. So when I switched to my master, which it was a master really focused on um, problems of our contemporary society from a philosophical point of view, and this problem that I studied during my period were related to indeed artificial intelligence, bioethics, but also politics, economics, and of course, among all these courses, I found a course in neuroethics. So on paper, looked good. So I decided to go further with it, and I basically got passionate about this topic. And then my master thesis was about neuroethics, and in particular about the brain stimulation and how patients interact, and basically how the symbiosis between a man and the machines can arise from a phenomenological point of view.
Cool. So it was this one course that got you.
Yeah, basically,
Yeah.
indeed, the
Through.
course in neuroethics, and then I decided to continue on this path.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot for sharing your personal background and your motivations. Now let's talk about digital brain twins. So, could you first explain to the listeners who might not be familiar with it yet, what is a digital brain twin?
Sure. Of course, before talking about digital brain twins, it's important to understand what digital twins actually is, and which is on paper very simple. A digital twin is composed by three main elements. The first one is a real entity, the digital copy, so the digital simulation of this entity, and a connection between these two elements. And this connection allowed for a constant flow of data from the real entity to the virtual entity. And basically, this connection is a real-time connection. So every time something changed in the real entity, the same change is reflected in the virtual entity. And at the beginning, this technological paradigm was very attractive for, let's say, for example, industries or the manufacturing sector. So because it's really nice to have a digital copy, for example, of a product. So you can basically check and monitor the entire life cycle of this product. And of course, you can run tests, let's say in silico, so in the virtual environment, in order to predict possible outcome of this test, and then improving the performance of a machine, for example. But you can also try to predict the future state of the machine itself. So, of course, in the manufacturing sectors, this is a very cool possibility that can enhance the entire process. Of course, these kind of features are of interest for medicine and for precision medicines specifically. And in this field, of course, a digital twin, and specifically a digital brain twin, is nothing less than a digital copy of the human brain.
Now that we know what a digital brain twin is, what exactly do you and your colleagues at SynTwin do?
So the SynTwin project is a project founded by the European Research Council, and the aim of this project is to just try to investigate which the possible ethical implication resulting from the use of digital twins in a medical context. So in my group, the members basically carried out their research on very different topics that are, of course, related to digital twins, but from different angles and perspective. For example, my colleague Andrew Barnett, who is postdoc in this project, is focusing his research on digital twins and disabilities. My other colleague, Nisa, she's a linguistic, and she's trying to understand how digital twins, which in some paradigms, they can basically provide, for example, suggestions to the patients through messages or also through AI voices. She's basically studying how how the communication between the patient and the digital twin should be shaped. And then there's my research, which is focused on those digital twins that try to replicate precisely the human brain. So approaches and visions are different, but the general aim is to try to understand what kind of ethical issues are at stake when we talk about digital twins, how can we address them, and how we can implement them in a fair way within the society and the medical context.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this sounds really interesting. So you briefly introduced us to digital brain twins and the SynTwin project. Now tell us more about your own work. Could you please elaborate on your dissertation project?
Sure.
So what is your research question and how do you plan to answer it?
So basically, the research question that guide my research is very simple. So actually, I'm wondering what are the ethical implications related to digital brain twins. So of course, someone can think, well, this question could be very similar if you are taking into account digital twins in general, or I don't know, digital twins of the heart or the liver. So I think that there are different ethical issues at stake, and this is basically why neuroethics is a discipline in itself. Is basically the little sister of bioethics, and basically neuroethics born because dealing with the brain entails very peculiar ethical issues compared to other organs. So basically the thesis of my project and what I expected to find out is that there are some very peculiar moral dilemmas that came out when we deal with a copy of a brain, and they are very different if compared to the copy of, I don't know, your lungs, for example. So regarding the methodology, so basically I'm thinking about a mixed approach. So on one end, I proceed with a, let's say, theoretical and conceptual approach. So I think that there are some ethical issues that can basically predict about possible influences this kind of technology can have, for example, on patients. So I rely on some, for example, principalist approach when we talk about which kind of ethical guidelines should guide the use of this technology. But on the other hand, I really think that it's important to catch some, let's say, empirical data and to have an empirical vision of this technology. So I think I will also conduct some experiments in order to understand how effectively this technology can impact medical context.
So like empirically informed
Yeah,
considerations.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's actually really nice. I think it's really important, and it's rare in philosophy, by the way.
Yeah.
I think so. So you did a double review, right, of literature on the potential harms of BCIs, brain-computer interfaces, and not digital brain twins, but just digital twins in general, right? And you said that there is a lot of literature on the potential harms of BCIs, but not that much on digital brain twins, if I remember correctly, right? So my question is, because this kind of seems to make sense to me, especially with invasive BCIs, because they can directly manipulate brain activity, unlike digital brain twins, which are simulation models. So it seems like BCIs are more dangerous because we can find out a lot about an individual's brain and influence it, whereas with digital brain twins, we can only find out information, so it's only one direction, right? So there is no real-time connection or no direct impact. Is this correct?
Well, it depends. On paper, there could be some direct connection because right now, digital brain twins, I mean, the concept in itself and the term used in this field sometimes are not really clear. So, for example, some studies consider a digital twins just a copy of a human brain. So, it could be basically a static model, and for some scholars, this is enough for digital twins.
I want to ask, what are the specific dangers of digital brain twins? Because I was thinking that actually, to me, BCIs do seem more dangerous. So I wanted to ask you about specific dangers or risks of digital brain twins. So why do you think we still need to discuss them?
So it's true that basically brain-computer interfaces entails a quite direct threat for human brain because, for example, there is a surgery behind the implantation of a brain-computer interface. Usually, just think about deep brain stimulation. And of course, there are risks related to this surgery. So from this point of view, for sure, BCIs entails much more risks than just a digital copy of your brain. And also because the activity of the BCIs directly interact with your brain. And usually, I mean, in the literature are very famous cases in which patients report changes in their personality traits. So, and this, of course, sounds like a very a risk we can't overlook. Yeah. I think that digital brain twins can also entail this kind of risk, because actually, if we want to stick with the paradigm of digital twins that I explained before about having a connection, so this means that potentially you should be connected with your brain, and this connection, of course, can rely on the implantation of some electrode in your brain that are supposed to record your brain activity in order to provide data constantly to the simulation. So potentially also DBTs, mainly digital brain twins, if they reach this level of development, they can entail a surgical procedure in order to be, let's say, installed in the brain. And of course, this is a risk, surgically speaking. Of course, there wouldn't be a sort of direct activity of the digital brain twins with your brain activity, since usually the aim would be to map the brain and not to stimulate it through two electrodes.
Mhm.
But still, I think that what is really interesting here is the interaction that can be established. And with interaction, I mean the relationship that the
Mhm.
patient can establish with such kind of technology. I
Mhm.
think that some risk lays here in this relationship.
Yeah.
Also because it's very important how you communicate the possibilities of this technology.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly,
Mhm.
imagine a very accurate replica of my brain
Mhm.
is created today. So
Mhm.
I get a digital brain
Mhm.
twin today. Then I continue living my daily life and experiencing various events that influence my brain structures. How does the digital brain twin then get updated to my brain?
Okay, this question is connected to what I said before,
Mm-hmm.
because some scholars define a digital brain twin just like a static model of the brain. This could be enough for some to declare to have a digital brain twins. And in this case, if you're talking about this, basically just a static copy, so we would have just a picture, a photograph in a precise moment of your brain, which is not connected with yours. So this would be still cool because we have a nice copy. Copy maybe is not the correct term, but a nice simulation, which is in the end an approximation of some biological structure. So we have this simulation, but still is not connected with you. Of course, we can run some text and have prediction on, I don't know, about the future structure of your brain, for example, which is in any case disconnected from your actual changes in your brain. So, of course, in this case, there would be no interaction. But if, as I said before, if we stick with the premises of digital twin technology, so even this direct connection between you and the virtual brain should be established. And this is possible, as I said, theoretically by implanting a sensor in your brain. And some studies have been made with, for example, monkeys, a group of scholars from, I think, they remember precisely the university, but they were Japanese. They conducted some experiment on monkeys, and they basically recorded their brain activity during different phase of consciousness through digital brain twins, which was connected with their brain. So actually, this real-time connection between a real brain and a virtual brain already happened. And of course, it's not that crazy to imagine that one day, for medical purposes, this kind of connection can be implemented also on humans.
Okay, thank you. So what came to my mind is that a digital brain twin could also possibly have negative effects on your personality, right? So like a self-fulfilling prophecy that if you find out something about your brain, maybe it's better if you don't find it out in general. But then I was thinking, isn't this something about other non-neurological biometrical data too? So, I mean, isn't this something, is it special about digital brain twins, or is it something like that we can say in general that maybe people should know everything about themselves in general?
So I think this could be a question strictly related, to, for example, to topic like incidental findings, which are basically usually involved in cases in which patients decide to be volunteers for an experiment, let's say for a brain scan for experimental purposes, and then after this scan, the researchers find out that, for example, this subject has a cancer in his brain. And this is something that maybe the person in question want not to know. And this is why, for example, now in the informed consent for this kind of experimentation, now a person can decide if they want to know these incidental findings or not. In the case of digital brain twins, well, since one of the most interesting features of this technology is the prediction capabilities. So basically, you can try through artificial intelligence to predict future trajectories of a disease, for example, or even try to predict possible disease in the future. I think this is a very important point, because actually, of course, digital twins, but in general, but also digital brain twins, changed the way you could perceive yourself, of course, and change, for example, they put in question topic and concepts like health, disease. So what does it mean to be healthy? What does it mean to be healed? Because I could feel very well from a medical point, and then my digital brain twins predict that I will, I don't know, for example, develop a neurological disease or a psychiatric disorders. So should I feel myself already healed or not?
Yeah.
Of course, they could shape the perception we have of ourselves. And this is, for example, a possibility that a very important and fundamental articles in neuroethics highlighted. I'm talking about a very famous article from Adina Roskis that basically is a milestone within the neuroethics field. It was published back to 2002. And it should be called Neuroethics for the New Millennium. And basically, in this article, the authors highlight some very, of course, important but possible question that neuroethics could deal with. And among these problems, Adina Roskis talked about possible provision that technology can make about our brain. So, of course, then you can think about also, for example, free will. Because if my digital brain twins says, okay, you are going to develop, I don't know, a very severe psychiatric disorder that can put in danger also people around you. So what should I do? Should I wait for this condition to arise, close in my house, or should I stroll out and around without any kind of concern, because I'm not, of course, healed yet, but I probably will be. So there are a lot of questions related to possible changes in personalities that can be connected also to freedom at a certain point, if we consider an example such this last one.
Yeah. So this is a really difficult question, but what should you tell people and what shouldn't you? So it seems to me that if you, for example, ask a patient, do you want to know something we found out about, say, your brain region X? This might already be too much. You might already have implied too much, and the patient will already know the answer, even if he or she says, no, actually, I don't want to know about it. So do you have any criteria for when to share biological or especially neurological facts about a person with them and when not to? And who should decide that? So is it the doctor, or rather the patient, or the society?
I will be quite brief on this point. I think that the patient has basically, let's say, the duty to defend in some way his own brain data and to be the one who decides to disclose or not to disclose some data, like neurological data, which are very, very sensitive. So I think, the actor who should decide in this case is just the patient.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Okay, so I know you're a philosopher, but still I'd like to ask you some questions concerning the legal aspects of digital brain twins. What kind of governance structures do you think will be necessary for digital brain twins?
Well, I think that this question involved not also digital brain twins, but neurotechnologies in general, because in the end, from a legal standpoint, I don't think that digital brain twins are much different from, for example, BCIs or other neurotechnologies. Right now, I think scholars are doing a very nice work from this point of view. Especially, there is a huge debate about neuro rights. So basically, those rights that should protect specifically brains and brain data. So I think that this kind of framework can easily be applied to digital brain twins as well. So of course the debate is open because some scholars are arguing, well, maybe we don't really need neurorights because the rights we are actually using are enough to cover also this problem. Could be. I'm not an expert precisely on this legal aspect, but I think that right now, as far as understood, neurorights can be used also as a legal starting point, at least, to address also those legal aspects that are involved by digital brain twins.
Yeah. And just to elaborate a bit more on these legal aspects, so do you think digital brain twins should rather be treated legally like medical devices, or more like data, or like something entirely new?
That's a nice question. So I would say both. Because of course we are talking about a piece of technology, but at the same time this piece of technology actually delivers some very important neural data. And as I said, these kind of data are really sensitive and they need to be protected. So I think that digital brain twins, like many other neurotechnologies, should be covered from both these sides.
Okay, and now about ethics. What role should neuroethicists play in shaping digital brain twin research?
Oh, well, I think it's a huge role because this technology is really, I mean, if we think about the possibilities, possible development, taking into account also increasing discoveries and the advancement of neuroscience research, this technology really need to be addressed philosophically and ethically speaking. And of course, as I said, one of the main risks could lay in the relationship that can be established between the patient and the digital simulation of their brain. And of course, this imply also both a philosophical reflection and also an ethical debate in order to regulate this technology and the interaction it has with the people and the patients and the general owner. So yes, I think philosophers in general in this kind of issues like applied technology really play a role because they have the duty to set a standard, let's say. I think that empirical findings from research that take into account this interaction, this relationship, can be used then to shape the technological design. So in order to make this technology appealing and let's say in order to make it fit with our needs and the needs of patients. And this is a philosophical work. This is something that ethicists should take care of.
Yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully.
So you're also developing some ethical guideline, right? About digital brain twins. Could you already give us like a sneak preview or some insights into what kind of ethical guidelines you're going to develop, or are you already that far with your work? Or
no. This would be the last part of my work, but I'm not developing precisely ethical guidelines, or maybe I will do. I don't know yet. It's still in progress. But right now, I'm thinking that basically we can already try to apply some ethical guidelines already given. For example, the 4 principles of biomedical ethics, given the context, could be interesting. And if you want to expand beyond the medical context, as I said, neurorights could be another framework useful to try to address and understand better this technology and to make it safe.
Okay. Actually, you're right. There are a lot of guidelines already. So as far as I know, digital brain twins are not very accurate yet. So what is the minimum threshold a simulation must meet to be considered a digital brain twin? So before you said that there are different concepts about definitions about what is a digital brain twin. So what would be your definition? What would you say are the necessary conditions for a digital brain twin?
So right now there are some projects that claim to work with digital brain twins, and in the end they are referring to a dynamic model which is not connected with a real person.
Yeah.
But having a dynamic model which is not static, it would be enough for them to call it a digital brain twins. This is fine. Could be a point. The point is how elaborated and precise this model should be, because digital brain twins are not just general brain simulation, but since they are tailored to specific patients, they usually require a higher precision and, let's say, a level of fidelity. So the real point is how precise can these brain simulations be. I like to quote a phrase from a quite famous paper about digital brain twins, which says a digital brain twins as a dynamic model which is not necessarily connected to a brain, to a real one. And the author says a digital brain twins should be as simple as possible, but as complex as necessary. This because basically it depends on the use you want to, how you want to use the digital brain twins. Because of course, if you are using for a patients with, I don't know, Parkinson's disease or dementia, of course you should prioritize the replication of certain brain area instead of the entire brain, which is impossible right now. So a good digital twins should be, let's say, a compromise between spatial resolution and biological realism, and you should emphasize this, those aspects of the brain that you deem relevant for your research. But of course, I think that a real proper digital brain twins, again, if you want to stick with the engineering conception of this technology, should also imply the linkage between the real brain and its virtual replication.
Okay. So for you, that would be a necessary condition, that there is a link, that it kind of gets updated and is connected, at least for a precise one, of course. So some of these issues about especially precise digital brain twins seems very important to me, but still kind of far in the future. So how realistic is it that effective and really precise digital brain twins will be developed, and when do you think this will happen?
I will introduce really briefly another technological paradigm just to give you a more precise idea of what's about my idea, basically. So sometimes, I mean, for a while in the philosophical literature, some philosophers argue about brain emulation, which is different from a brain simulation. A brain simulation is not an approximation like a simulation. A simulation is basically aims to replicate the external behavior of an entity, while a simulation also replicate the inner causal mechanism that lead to this external behavior. So it's a one-to-one copy, and the brain emulation is a one-to-one copy of a real brain. And this kind of technology has been connected, for example, with mind uploading, because it would be basically a real brain but with a different substrate of matter. It's a brain not made of biological matter but made of silicon. Okay, now some philosophers argue about the possibility and the feasibility of this kind of emulation. And in a quite famous text, Nick Bostrom and Anders Sandberg discussed about the possibility to realize this kind of emulation. And they, if I remember correctly, set the turning point around the second half of this century. Given our last progress in this field, I would say that the second half of this century, it would be a good, let's say, moment or a nice time frame for digital brain twins and then simulation. So I would set, and I think that this would be possible considering how fast science is advancing. After 2050 and between 2000 to 2100. So I would put brain emulation even further in the future. So, but I think that at least other 25, 30 years are necessary in order to have a proper digital brain twins.
Yeah, thank you. I'm curious if I will live to see.
Hopefully, yes. Hopefully, yes.
How should digital brain twins be communicated to the public to avoid misunderstandings or hype? Because like right now I'm thinking of AI, and of course AI ethics is so important because AI is important, but still I think a lot of it also contributes to the hype, which is sometimes, I guess, a bit exaggerated, and also kind of it's about resource allocation. So how do you think should we communicate this?
These are central point, because if you think about the terms digital twins, this is already misleading, because you could think about, I mean, twin is basically from biological standpoint or in a common sense something that is identical to you. And some authors already highlighted this point since regarding digital twins in general, since basically patients could think that he is about to have or use a technology that actually precisely replicate a part of his body, which is not true. As I said, there are simulations, and simulation are approximations. So some scholars suggested to change this term to using something more neutral, for example, duplicates, but still it carries some difficulties, or you can use simulacra, but maybe it's not really nice from a commercial point of view. But yes, the term twin actually is a lie if we stick it to its real meanings. Even more if we are talking about digital brain twins, because as I said, we are really far from having a good functioning simulation of the brain. So I think that we can keep the term digital brain twins or digital twins, but we should be very clear to, let's say, to the public, to the general public, and the audience or possible user of the technology about the possibilities that they actually are capable of, which are, I repeat, really nice, and I'm quite enthusiastic about it, but still there are limits, evident limits. And so also talking about digital brain twins, and here again, why I'm so concerned about the relationship between patients and his digital brain twins. If I'm a patient not well educated, or which basically doesn't know anything about neuroscience and current computational possibilities, I could be, let's say, scared, or I could feel uncomfortable with a digital, let's say, copy of my brain, because this is how maybe someone could perceive it, as a copy. And of course, I think it's easy to just end up think about some conspiracy theory, or just to overestimate the capabilities of this kind of technology. I can easily imagine a person thinking that his entire conscious experience basically is enclosed in this virtual space. Or someone could think about a mind duplication. So of course this is not real, but we should be very clear about this, and clearly provide explanation about the possibilities entailed by this technological paradigm.
Yeah, thanks. I really agree. I think that like science communication is so important for the public, but especially for patients and potential patients. So the next question would be a kind of deeper philosophical question. do you think that digital brain twins challenge traditional philosophical ideas about personal identity or the self? And if so, how?
Yeah, this question is connected to the previous one about personality changes and the possibility that digital twins can actually impact on your identity. So yeah, there is the work of a very interesting philosopher I recently discovered. Her name should be Catherine Malibu. She's French. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, but still, she wrote extensively about, for example, brain trauma and brain damages. And especially because this kind of accident, like for example the very famous accident of Phineas Gage, are perceived like a sort of interruption of personal identity. Something new came up, so it's not the same person anymore. So and she talked about how we should basically embrace these changes and may consider them in some way as a part of a dynamic concept of identity. And if digital brain twins can predict, for example, can be used to predict, for example, neuroplasticity, which is basically the capability of brain to reorganize itself after a trauma, but also during learning, for example. So yeah, digital brain twins are actually a technology that can challenge our understanding of identity and ourselves. And there is a nice paper that actually discusses the possibility of using digital brain twins to predict neuroplasticity and also then to have an impact on the identity. And the authors of this paper actually used as a framework the perspective from Catherine Malibu.
Okay. One topic that I find really important is the need for resources and issues of global justice. So, as you mentioned before, a realistic or kind of accurate digital brain twin would need to model trillions of neurons and their dynamics and would have to simulate many different things at once. So how resource intensive would a kind of accurate digital brain twin actually be? Can you give a rough idea?
Oh yeah, sure. This is a quite debate topic actually. Actually, digital twins, not just digital brain twins, but digital twins in general can be a challenging technology from a, for example, environmental point of view, because there are some papers that discuss the possible food carbon print of this technology. In Spain, there is a laboratory and a supercomputer that actually run a digital heart twin, and it's massive. It's massive. It's basically inside a church. It was an old church, not used anymore for ceremonies. But yeah, there are all these. There is this huge computer that actually is used to run this simulation, and of course, the energy required to run just the simulation of the approximated simulation of a heart are crazy. The computational capabilities and the energy we need is crazy. Just think about a proper brain simulation. So the impact on the environment is something we should take care of at a certain point, because this technology will require a lot of energy in order to run this simulation. If I don't know, in the future maybe this could be a quite common technology. So we really need to work on it to maximize computational capabilities and maybe try to reduce the space that these computers need. And we should take into account the impact that this technology can bring to the environment. And of course, maybe try to switch to some other kind of energies that don't have this great impact on the environment.
Mhm.
And of course, this also lead to the idea and the concept of justice.
Yeah.
Of course, there are some countries that are not capable of sustaining this kind of cost
Mhm.
or to switch to other um, energy sources
Mhm.
just because they have no
Yeah.
possibility for it or they don't have enough money for this transaction.
Mhm.
And of course, this is going to affect theoretically a large part of the population of a certain area or country. So yes, and of course, also if we want to talk about justice, this technology, I presume, will cost a lot.
Yeah.
And so in some healthcare system, this wouldn't guarantee to people that actually could benefit from it. And this technology can remain in the hands of few lucky people that actually can have a simulation of their brain and they can predict possible outcomes, so they can taking a action in advance in order to feel well over time. And this is something that in a democratic context should be guaranteed to any citizens.
Yeah. Yeah, so actually you already mentioned something that I wanted to ask in the next question. So about this justice aspect, so that it's not only important to keep these environmental aspects in mind, but also justice. So very closely connected to that is the question: would a technology like that ever be applicable to a broad range of people? What you just said is I mean, the ideal. Like even disregarding the many injustices in that world. So if we imagine a perfectly just world, then just in theory, would it be possible to create accurate digital brain twins to improve therapy for, say, all patients with a certain neurological disorder or psychological illness? And this is, I mean, the common objection to many technologies, not only digital brain twins, but although it's so common, I think it's important, like, would this technology actually only improve the medical treatment of, as you said, affluent patients in economically strong countries, and while people in other regions actually pay the price for it. And this is also something you already mentioned, like for its emissions, minerals, and cooling water. So my question would be, how could digital brain twins be developed sustainably and fairly without worsening already existing societal and global injustices?
We could talk about it for many, many hours,
Yeah,
but I would like
for
to
sure.
provide you one single example. And I'm referring to be underrepresented in the medical context, and in this case, regarding a precise kind of technology that should be tailored to precise patients. I'm quite concerned about the software that should run this simulation, because the software in itself should contain some, let's say, assumption about a brain works, about its structure. And so, of course, there is the risk that even if in the end the simulated brain is in some way tries to be tailored to a specific patients, this background assumption could lead to a production of some standardized brain. So some, for example, personal brain features can be missed. And also, if these data are just about background data that lead then the general development of a digital brain, do not take into account, for example, data from patients with neurodiversities, for example. So there is the risk to be unrepresented. And the brain, even if the promise was to have a specific and patient-tailored brain, in the end, it could be just a standardized brain with just some many features that are just few features that are different, but in the end they could be not really specific or personalized. This is a risk, so we should take into account how we develop the software that in turn they run this simulation in order to make them flexible and capable of embracing different neurological aspects of people.
And I guess that the more personalized it is, the more resource intensive it will also be.
Exactly,
Right?
and then we turn
So,
back to
yeah.
the environmental problem.
Yeah. Well, this is also important because, I mean, we could actually avoid a lot of biases if we personalize it more, so that also neurodivergent people get kind of accurate replica of their brain. But yeah, then it's more resources.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So is our dog chasing its tail?
Yeah. So we agree that while there are potential risks about digital brain twins, and the resource topic is a huge issue, global justice also issue, there is still great potential, especially for medical purposes. So my question now would be, do you also see potential non-medical uses for digital brain twins, and which ones might be beneficial and which raise red flags?
Nice question. I'm thinking on some parallelism with BCIs. On the market, there are some BCIs that, for example, aim to improve your cognitive capabilities, to enhance basically your cognitive capabilities. So there are BCIs, non-invasive BCIs, that can, for example, help you to concentrate it more, or to improve your memory. But of course, we are talking about a direct impact on the brain activity. Yeah, maybe it could be useful, for example, or having a digital brain twins for some kind of athletes, in order to maybe maximize their performance. Now, I'm not an expert. I'm just making an hypothesis. Maybe there are some skills, physical skills, but also, I don't know, maybe chess is considered a sport, for example. Now there are also esports, so basically video games tournaments, and of course, brains play a good role, I guess. But even if we stick to classical sports, maybe there are some activities that are strictly or can be strictly related to certain neural patterns or certain brain activity, and basically they can be used to predict improvement after trainings, or I don't know, to just have a possible trajectory on how an athlete is performing during a training, if this athlete can reach a certain standard through by watching his brain activities. This is an example I can think about.
Is there any use that you'd say, okay, this is a complete no-go? Any red flag where you'd say, okay, this should simply not be developed?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I've never thought about it, to be honest. For example, I can imagine some use of digital brain twins for market purposes, for example. But again, we enter in a gray zone related to brain data, which has been already discussed. Of course, these data shouldn't be, disclosed or shared without the consent of a specific person. Yeah, I mean, in the end, I can think about hacking, for example. In the same, this happened also can happen with brain-computer interfaces. It has been proved on laboratories that potentially you can enter in the BCIs of a patient and take control of it. So I can imagine something similar can happen also for digital brain twins. So basically, just imagine an hacker or an hacker performing, for example, an illegal or unauthorized access in the brain simulations, and maybe there are some data that can be collected, or it can try to run a multiple legitimate experiment on this brain simulation. But in the end, it's not about develop or not develop digital brain twins. They should be developed, I guess, because the benefits can be a lot. It's always about how you use the technologies. So it's always the, let's say, dual use problem. So you can make a good use of these technologies or a bad one. It's always about intention.
Yeah, and about security in general and data protection.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I got a personal question. Would you want a digital twin of your brain to be created? And if so, why or why not?
Um, yes, because, and this would be just for a scientific interest of mine. I think it would be nice from a medical standpoint. I would be very curious to see what kind of prediction this kind of machine can make about my brain. But yeah, just for scientific interest, I guess, just because I'm really into this kind of topic. Of course, it's like asking, I don't know, paleontologists, do you want to see a dinosaur? I think the answer would be yes. So, but I think I would consent to having a digital brain twins in case I would need to. So if I develop a neurological disease, probably I would try to rely or to try benefits from this kind of technology. Yeah.
And this is the last question, kind of general one. If you could receive an answer today about neurotechnology 20 years from now, what question would you ask? So imagine there's, I don't know, some being who can tell you the answer, and you can ask whatever you want to one question.
So people from the future, and they can ask them.
Say 2050 or 2060.
Well, actually, I would ask them if in the end we had a good brain simulation connected to the real brain, just to stick with the topic. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for taking your time. I wish you all the best with your project, with your SimTwin and your dissertation. And I'm curious about how the future of digital brain twins is going to look like.
We'll see. And maybe we will shape that future. So I hope.
Hopefully in an ethical way.
Exactly.